To truly partner with the state in the spirit of system reform, we have to work as their catalytic advisors, technical partners and knowledge partners, right? No NGO, no philanthropy alone can solve for a state as large as Uttar Pradesh.
Hello, welcome to EI Dialogues. My name is Pranav Kothari. I'm the CEO of Educational Initiatives. We aim to see a world where children are learning with understanding. We make student assessments so that we can diagnose where children have misconceptions and then make MindSpark to be able to remediate those misconceptions. About 5 years ago, I was having conversations with leaders from the education sector, and I would walk out of these wishing that more people would have heard what we discussed. That's when we launched EI Dialogues. It's our endeavor to bring in-depth discussions on topics with many nuances to you as the audience to be able to appreciate both the highs and lows of working in the sector. EI Dialogues has had numerous education leaders spanning assessments, EdTech, RCTs, funding, and different topics, so do check out the entire series. Today I'm looking forward to my conversation with Shaveta. She is the CEO and MD of Central Square Foundation. My first memory of CSF is way back in 2012, where they were the people who gave us the first grant to start MindSpark centers in the urban slums of Delhi. Over the last decade, CSF and EI have brought EdTech to millions of students across India, and would love to learn how far we have come on that. India is at an inflection point on assessments, having recently done Nipun and Safal as different organizations and bringing this both in paper and digital formats to students to generate data that tells us what teachers and system officials can then utilize to improve learning outcomes. With Shaveta, I'd love to learn about how she has worked with multiple states, both in partnerships as well as independent capacities. Welcome to EI Dialogues, Shaveta. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Pranav. Looking forward.
Me too. Shaveta, how large is the Indian education system? And if someone wanted to make a dent in improving learning outcomes and taking us out of the second last in the world on PISA, where should they start? What should they do?
Yeah, so just in terms, we always, Pranav, talk about how large and complex the Indian education system is. And of course, it's complex because we're a large country with many different languages, with many different contexts. But just to put it in terms of numbers, right, we have 26 crore children going to 15 lakh schools being taught by 95 lakh teachers. That's the sheer size in terms of numbers. Then we add the complexity of language and that every state has its own unique social context. And languages in India are actually a continuum. I mean, even let's take a main Hindi heartland state like Uttar Pradesh. To you and I, everyone in UP speaks Hindi. But we have this whole spectrum of bolis and dialects. So a Hindi that gets spoken in eastern UP is different from a Hindi that gets spoken in a Lucknow versus what you and I might speak sitting in Delhi. And I think that's in this system, any philanthropic capital that comes to support education cumulatively across HNIs, CSR, international foundations amounts to less than 3% of what the government spends in education. So for a system which is this large, for a country which is spending resources in education, the only way to bring about reform, the only way to strengthen learning outcomes for our children is to partner with the government. And to me, that's the essence of system reform, partnering with the government to ensure any step taken forward is permanent. It's not a band-aid solution, but we are structurally fixing issues as we move along.
When you say working with the government, like what is this government? Who is this government? How big is this? What's the structure?
So we have a federal structure, and per our constitution, education is a subject on the concurrent list, which basically means that the central government, which is now the Ministry of Education, has the responsibility for setting the policies and the frameworks, and they do provide funding for centrally sponsored schemes. But those are guidelines which then the state education department takes forward. And at a state level, the three institutional structures which work on education is the Department of Education, which is typically headed by a senior bureaucrat. We have the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, which is what receives and anchors and controls all the funding spent, both from Ministry of Education and within the state. And at a national level, we have NCRT, which I think most of us are familiar with, the National Council of Education, Research and Training. The state equivalent is SCRT, which in a way is the academic custodian of all education, the pedagogy and the instruction designs. So these are the three main institutional bodies at a state level, which of course work under the political leadership of the education minister.
So if someone were to work with the state, they would have to work with the Principal Secretary of Education, to whom both the SCRT director as well as the state project director for Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan and also the director for Department of Education roll into. Yes. So those are the 3 or 4 bureaucrats that they would work with. And this ideally in conjunction with the education minister and the chief minister to really sort of ensure that whatever is discussed, agreed upon is rolled out across the state. Would that be a correct interpretation?
Yes, absolutely.
What's the issue with FLN or Foundational Literacy and Numeracy? I mean, surely it can't be that hard to teach, second graders how to read and do basic math.
It's actually harder than it seems. Let's also get the context of when we talk about a second grader. A second grader in India is a 7-year-old. Per the Right to Education Act, a child's journey starts as when she's 6 years old, she gets admission in grade 1. And chronologically, when she's 14 years, she'll be in grade 8. And then you enroll for secondary school, where we do have a drop-in enrollment. When it comes to enrollment at a primary school level, we are near 100%. Even after COVID, the whole migration displacement, we are back to, on enrollment, India looks good. So we've managed to get our children into school. Unfortunately, we haven't put enough focus on, are those children learning? I mean, again, right, India has had a long history of reform, from DPEP of the 1980s to the Right to Education Act. Let's get the children in school, which required infrastructure. To ensure children continue to come to school and to incentivize enrollment and continued attendance, we came up with programs like midday meals, free textbooks. So there are a lot of perks given for parents to enroll children in school and incentives for them to focus on attendance, which continues to be a big challenge. Unfortunately, because we've been very input driven, we haven't focused on the quality of learning. Also, a 6-year-old walking into a government school, Pranav, unfortunately, hasn't had access to a structured pre-primary education. I'll give you a simple indicator, which is, which our audience can also relate to. Vocabulary, just the number of words a young child knows becomes a great indicator of how she will learn in her early years, and in fact can determine what her learning outcomes will be. Now, a child living in a low-income community with parents who are probably, semi-literate, daily wage earners, in her home and community setup, she is not getting that exposure for pre-literacy, pre-numeracy, what we call emergent skills. Now, this child is put into a grade 1 classroom. If we look at the private sector, typically, I started a structured learning program with my children when they were 18 months. It seems silly to me now, but now those programs start at 6 months. Home factors work in favor of these children because they get that exposure at home. So a child in a mid-income school has done at least 2 years of pre-primary before she starts engaging with a grade 1 curriculum. In a government school, a child who comes from a high needs segment, where the home and community factors are not supporting her learning, is cognitively put in a classroom to engage with a grade 1 curriculum, which she is just not ready to, right? Both from an age perspective and capability perspective. And that's where the gap sets in.
So how big is this gap? Let's say if you were to take a second grade from a private school, or let's say your children, versus the average government school child. Could you quantify in terms of number of words per minute or other things on how big is this gap?
So, if we were to talk in correct words per minute, which is a metric for oral reading fluency, and again, just the caveat why we talk very often about oral reading fluency, because it's not an end unto itself, but it's a great indicator of how the child will transition to reading with meaning. Right. Typically, a child in a tribal area at grade 2 could be at single digit correct words per minute, whereas say a child in a mid-income or a high-income segment could be upwards of 45 to 60 correct words per minute. That's how stark the divide becomes.
Would it be fair to say that in Uttar Pradesh, your challenge is to take children who are in second grade from 5 words per minute to, let's say, 40 words per minute?
45 correct words per minute.
For a system that has about 100,000 schools, has about 20 crore, has about, let's say, 2 crore students
in the early grades.
In the early grades who are sort of studying there. And so the work that you're doing with the government is to take these 2 crore students from 5 to 45 by speaking in Hindi the correct words per minute, and being able to recognize digits, be able to add and subtract, be able to utilize
basically get them to be able to do the 4 basic mathematical operations.
Right.
Plus, minus, multiply and divide.
So what's your game plan for taking 2 crore students from 5 to 45 words per minute to be able to do the 4 operations for a system that large?
So when we started our journey is when India, I'm talking 2019, so we didn't have the benefit of New Education Policy 2020. Nipun Bharat as a national mission hadn't got launched. But because there was the political and bureaucratic will, CSF actually got a coalition of partners together to support what at that time was called Mission Prerna in Uttar Pradesh. The idea being precisely this, and Lakshyas were set up, which are targets to say by grade 1, 2 and 3, what do we want the literacy metrics to be? What do we want the numeracy metrics to be? You know, from number recognition to single digit addition to 2-digit subtraction and division, of course, over grade 1, 2 and 3. This was also a learning in our journey as CSF, Pranav, to say that to truly partner with the state in the spirit of system reform, we have to work as their catalytic advisors, technical partners and knowledge partners, right? No NGO, no philanthropy alone can solve for a state as large as Uttar Pradesh, right? What we did was set up a coalition of partners who brought complementary skills and more importantly were mission aligned to say that I am not coming to UP to run my own pilot or my own program, but I am working with the department, the Samagra Shiksha and SCRT to design a program that will be the state's own program. So there was Central Square Foundation from the very beginning. Samagra, which is a governance consulting firm, became our PMU partner. Language and Learning Foundation that CSF had been working with for the last 7 years when we started this journey came on board as the technical partner for Hindi. Vikram Shila came on board as the numeracy partner. And what was very clear between CSF, LLF and Vikram Shila, which are all NGOs by the way, right, that we are not going there to run our own program. We will be technical partners, do an assessment of how UP is working on early learning, help identify the state what the gaps are and partner with them to co-create the new solutions. In fact, when Nipun Bharat Mission did get launched in 2021, a lot of the examples that it quoted were from the learning and journey that UP had had as a state in Mission Prerna.
Shaveta, if I were to give you a time machine and go from November 2023, where we are today, back to 2019, what would you do the same and what would you do differently?
So I think the choice that I'm very happy about is the fact that we took a coalition approach. Like Pranav, when we were starting this journey, one question for CSF was that, you know, if you want to focus on foundational literacy and numeracy, as we are building new muscle within the leadership team at CSF, should we, let's say, hire a PhD expert on language and, you know, like a pedagogy expert on math? I am so glad and so happy we took the decision to say that what system reform for early learning in India needs is not yet new program on how to learn Hindi, right? From Pratham to Room to Read to Language and Learning Foundation, there are great models of how young children will learn language. Between Vikram Shila and Akshara and many other organizations, there are incredible programs. The gap is not in saying we don't have good programs. The fact is that NGOs have good programs, state governments have their own programs. How do we make sure that we converge for a workable solution? So I'm very glad, I mean, a decision I would not change is the coalition approach.
On the coalition, working with partners, there's this general tendency to believe that it's harder, there's more transaction costs, people have different agendas. You seem to be very happy with the choice of partnerships. Tell us more why you would do it similarly.
So why I would, I mean, by the way, when people do believe it has additional transaction cost, it does. I don't want to glamorize it and say, you know, we all high-fived and we came together. And I think I've said it in forums with our partners together. it takes a lot of blood, sweat and tears.
Yes.
I think at the core, it takes a deep mission and vision alignment, right?
Yeah.
Like organizations have to come together because we truly believe we are not here to run yet another NGO pilot program, right? I'll get a donor, I'll work in a set of schools,
Yeah.
my people, my process, great impact.
Yeah.
But when my donor stops funding me, we'll all go back home, and unfortunately, the system will fall to the pre-intervention levels. So if there is the deep commitment and recognition that we all have complementary skills to offer, we are not looking for visibility for our brand and our donors, but we are truly working to support the state government designer program, which will outlast all of us.
Yeah.
So I think that's the secret sauce which holds it all together.
Yes.
The transaction cost, I think, becomes high only because how do you define what each organization's roles are? Let me give you an example, right? LLF is an expert on how to teach Hindi. Vikram Shila is expert on how to teach math. But eventually, there's one teacher who has to teach both Hindi and math.
Yes.
Typically, NGOs in India, so the government is running a training. I'm NGO 1, I come and run a training on how to teach Hindi.
Yeah.
NGO 2 will come and say, I'll train you on how to
Yeah.
teach math. If I'm a teacher, I'll say, okay, well, good for all of you. I'll go back to my class and do what I've always done because I've been teaching for, and I don't blame that teacher, right? So even before we align with the state, aligning on what that common instruction design and hence a common training program needs to be. I think that's where, the interconnections are deeper. They are messy. They're not clean, right? It's not clean pieces of jigsaw coming together. I think that's what makes the transaction cost higher. But that's the only way that every aspect of what we call a complex education production function will get.
Yes.
Because if all of us come with our slivers of solutions, then we are still taking a product, we are taking a program. We are not designing a solution which can actually outlast all of us within the state. So I think that for me is why I would still go back and follow a coalition approach.
If I were to sort of reflect on my last 4 years, I resonate with forming partnerships. Over the last 4 years, we've formed partnerships with about 10 different nonprofits. In Uttar Pradesh itself, we worked on the world's largest education development impact bond, and our partners, Pratham Infotech Foundation, implemented MindSpark in government schools. And we had our share of woes. There were a lot of fights, but there were a lot of stakeholders. It was publicly visible. But I'm glad that organizations held it together. So Dalberg was the project manager, there were funders, there were outcome payers, risk investors. And I think just doing this helped me realize that Pratham's ability to execute on the ground at the last mile, hire the staff, be able to navigate the permissions that are needed, that's their comparative advantage. And I think what that allowed us to focus on is to just improve the literacy and numeracy software, ensure there are no technical issues, the reports are bring on time. And by both of us playing to our comparative advantages, we were able to focus and improve learning outcomes at large scale. So as you were holding these different partners together, you mentioned quite a few of them. Do you remember a particular moment or a particular strategy you did to keep it together, even when it sort of was at its, most heightened state of emotion?
I think we still go through heightened states of emotions for different reasons. But I think personally what has held me individually in good stead and, anchoring this for CSF is authentic conversations. Rather than make assumptions about one another, just what I call clearing the deck conversations. I think my big learning is when smaller issues are allowed to brew under the surface, they escalate unnecessarily. And Pranav, at the end of the day, why is anyone working in partnership with the state is because we truly believe that the child and the community benefits when the government's own system gets stronger, right?
Yes.
So if the driving force is how do we get all children in Uttar Pradesh to be fluent in Hindi and math, to be able to read with meaning, because if they don't do this in early grades, how will they even survive middle school? And I'm using the word survive, right?
Yes.
If the child doesn't know how to read, how will she transact EVS and science curriculum, right? So if you're deeply mission aligned with clarity.
Yes.
and you're able to ensure that issues get resolved along the way. And also, by the way, I truly believe system reform at scale, the way we are attempting with Nipun missions across 11 states that we work in, hasn't been attempted at this scale ever before, right? I mean, NGOs have tried to collaborate. Sometimes funders have tried to get NGOs together. But the work that we are doing, whether it's in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, Telangana, is in true partnership with the government system. Right. I mean, I always say that, whether it's, anyone who wants to go and see a CSF program, given that we started in 2012, we work on FLN in 11 states, I can't actually take you anywhere to show you a CSF program because there is no CSF program. I can take you to a school in Uttar Pradesh to show you Nipun Uttar Pradesh and talk about the role we have played and our coalition has played in enabling that program. And to me, that is the power of system reform.
Of course, it's this larger goal of improving literacy and numeracy for students so that they thrive in middle school and sort of graduate with flying colors. But at the core of it, an organization is still trying to impress its funders, still trying to get its brand out there, still trying to grow. And unless they take credit for this and show that they were part of the success, and that's how organizations would also like to do that.
Of course. No, of course, there's a use case of you want to be able to talk about, quote this work and get credit for it. But sorry, I interrupted your question.
Yes. So, in those moments when organizations are also trying to get credit while they solve the larger purpose, how have you managed to keep the coalition together? What were the low points? How did you navigate beyond the conversations? Were there any initiatives that you took as a funder to sort of keep it together? And how do you get people to talk to you vulnerably? Because ultimately you are paying for some of this and they may not want to sort of show you what's happening on the ground. There's always that fear, even if the intention is right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me talk about the brand and the visibility, right? I think if a CSF as the funder and as, getting the coalition together, leading that coalition, if we were to start caring about the visibility of our brand and not that of all coalition partners, would be one deal breaker, right? Because then we are not really behaving as equals on the table. I think our approach always has been, of course, if I have a large donor visiting, do I want to be able to take them to meet the, the government leadership in Lucknow to talk about the support we've been giving? Yes. But does that mean that we care about our brand on every teaching, learning material in every classroom, which is how a lot of conventional, donor community has engaged with education? That's not the approach, and that cannot be the approach, right? Because any teaching learning material that is going, like I said, right, is not CSF material. It's the state material. And again, Pranav, no philanthropy can actually fund and support year on year for the long term that all teaching learning material resources that reach classrooms, all teacher training that happens, all monitoring systems that get designed, all assessments that get run, they cannot be funded by philanthropy. It's as simple as that, right? We've played a catalytic role. We've been a knowledge partner. We've been a thought partner in making sure the solutions that the system is adopting are high quality and get for learning outcomes. So just addressing the branding part. I think in terms of how, I genuinely think a big part of creating that space to be authentic and vulnerable is to present yourself in that manner. So while there is a formal division of roles and responsibility and there is the cadences, I think it's also just coming together to do an honest assessment of where have we managed to move forward. And in most cases, it might feel that, we wanted things to happen a certain way and we might not have achieved all those components. But taking stock of what that movement has been, what's amiss, and how do we even address those issues, right? While we always look to even set up a formal steering committee at the government level with our government stakeholders, doing an equivalent together internally. I think one big learning experience is doing field visits together because you spoke about data, right? And also for our coalition in Uttar Pradesh, the Gates Foundation is also a direct donor. So whether it's doing visits together with LLF and Vikram Shila or BMGF, CSF and LLF together, right? Because what you see in a classroom is more authentic than sometimes what the government self-reported data says.
Yes. So Shaveta, you're on this mission to improve foundational literacy and numeracy for 2 crore students in UP. We spoke about that you're very happy with the design choice of working with partners. I resonate with that, so that we take the specialist talent that exists and how do we leverage that with the government system. Is there a regret that you have? Is there something you would do differently if you could rewind the clock?
So I think two things pop up. One is even better role clarity. I think we broadly knew what each partner's role would be. But if I could rewind and go back to 2019, just being more explicit on what each partner's deliverables are, how are we accountable to one another and then the government system. I think we could have done a better job. I think the second, in hindsight, again, while in system reform, I've spoken about government stakeholders and the need to work with the departments, Samagra Shiksha and SCRT. Somewhere I think we did not as a coalition, and I think that's been a learning across all states. I would prioritize and spend more time in deepening our relationships and ways of working with the government.
What would that look like? More visits, more steering committee meetings? How would you
I would say
that?
all of that, right? Because I think it's very necessary for system reform to have a dynamic, visionary project champion from within the government system. But we always talk about that bureaucrats tend to get transferred, right? Then you start working also with their teams who have the context of education, have been a part of the state's education system for probably a couple of decades and will be around, right? Just the institutional and contextual knowledge they carry. So I would say everything from, broadening and deepening relationship with a broader base of stakeholders than just a few government stakeholders, to taking them along in that journey, from steering committee to visits together to, and again, right, the idea is not to do nth level of focus groups, because you're also working under a time frame for materials to get designed, but making it a more immersive and experiential experience for all stakeholders together.
Is there something or strategy or an execution that would help you achieve this systemic reform faster? Is there a particular way to achieve these goals faster, apart from all the human efforts that are going into through the nonprofits, through the design of the curriculum, through the trainings of the teachers, working with the different pieces? Like, is there something you can do to turbocharge this?
So a few things, right? I think for us, a big part of the turbocharge for the work came with NEP 2020 and Nipun Bharat Mission. So states like Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, we started working on FLN. UP called it Mission Prerna, Madhya Pradesh called it Mission Ankur, still chooses to call it Mission Ankur in 2019. Haryana, LLF had been working, and we were a risk investor under a development impact bond in 7 districts, which in a way organically, when Nipun came, became the Nipun Haryana mission. So I think a big part of the turbocharge has come from policy. And Pranav, not just that NEP said early learning is the most important part of our new education policy, the fact it was followed up with a mission, with dedicated funding. The funding is not to hire more people. The funding is to design better teaching learning materials, to design better assessments, and to hire, a cadre of professionals at a district level. So I think that's been a big part of turbocharging the mission. I think the second part is just monitoring and assessment system. At the end of the day, because the problem is huge, and because we have a long distance to cover, we do need a dipstick of how are we moving, right? I mean, we'll not, and again, right, Nipun reached classrooms only in the academic year 22-23. So we were also dealing with COVID learning loss. The youngest children, unfortunately, are the ones who got ignored even for home learning, right? The focus was on high school and board exams. So a monitoring and assessment system which allows us to do a diagnostic of, what the baseline of learning is, and actually being able to track how children are learning, for a teacher to know how children in her class are learning, for a district leadership to know what the trend line at a block and cluster level is. I think a third way to, of course, turbocharge it is how do we leverage the education technology that's available to us as a country. Again, right, due to absolutely external reasons, India is digitally getting transformed, right? That's a very powerful tool in the hand of every teacher, every education functionary, and also nearly every parent. Incredible way to augment teaching learning is to tap into the power of that, both for home learning and the fact that, of course, even under ICT policy, the way the government is now thinking of edtech solutions for middle school and high school, I think can be a great multiplier for learning of our children.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of EdTech, and I've seen, like, during COVID, when schools were shut, students were able to continue their learning by borrowing their parents' phone. And with our work with Bharat EdTech initiative that we've done across multiple states, we find that even half an hour of learning through the smartphone can actually, dramatically improve learning outcomes of students. And I feel like, technology can actually close the digital divide, or let's say technology can close the educational divide that sort of exists today, where the learning gaps between the private school system at the top end versus the today education is correlated with parents' income levels, right?
Yes.
But I think the smartphone ownership with data, coupled with a high quality educational software that can be adaptive to a child's level of knowledge, is based on pedagogical research, is contextualized in their language of comfort, and allows the data to be seen by parents, officials, together can help, accelerate the learning. So they go to school, they learn in school what human teachers can do fabulously well, which is activity-based learning, experiments, projects, debates. But they can come back home and continue their learning through a software that helps them learn based on what their learning gaps are. So as opposed to everyone doing the same worksheet, where they don't get feedback quickly, software can actually help close on this gap. So that, I think, is something that, as India's GDP per capita grows, as smartphone ownership grows, data grows even further, I think a high quality learning software that is aligned to what the school is doing can help, because every child deserves a coach that helps his or her
Supports,
maximize their potential. But this coach needs to work with the school teacher.
Absolutely.
And align to the curriculum. So that has been
And
our
I think
experience.
to me, Pranav, those are the two clinches that you said, right? A shared device. We typically worry about edtech that, do children going to government schools or low-fee private schools, they don't come from home factors where, economically a dedicated device can be made available. But increasingly, the evidence from studies is telling us children, especially young children, even middle school and high school children, do not need a dedicated device. The second issue becomes over to, in promoting edtech, is it healthy? Is it right for the child? But we are not talking about hours and hours on the device. And let's accept our children are on the phone more than we want them in any case, right? How do we ensure the time on the device is actually supporting the child's learning? And it's not just pure entertainment, right? Or dead time, right? Which is what a lot of device time becomes. And the other clincher you said is for it to get integrated to what the teacher is teaching. Yes. My deep wish for how we can effectively leverage edtech, not as a product or an app, but as a solution is to say what the teacher is teaching in, say, week 5, day 2, is actually the supplementary material that goes either at home for home learning on a parent's shared device, or the practice questions that the child does when she goes to the ICT computer lab in the school is also aligned to that, right? So an integrated solution where the teacher is actually a sponsor of that solution and is not seeing it as a distraction is, I think, where the true power of edtech can be unlocked.
Shaveta, despite my immense excitement for edtech to serve low-income students and doing this for the last 12 years, I have failed to create any kind of a government procuring edtech at scale to be able to put devices in classroom, to pay for the software or implement learning. What have I done wrong and what can I do differently?
No, Pranav, and again, right, the journey for procurement of personalized adaptive solutions in Andhra Pradesh is a shared journey for EI and CSF. I think everyone in this sector has to be strongly optimistic, which is how we survive. I don't think it's what we are doing wrong. I do strongly believe it's just the evolution of edtech in India. You know this better than me. ICT was about setting up a computer lab. So India learned how to buy hardware. Then somewhere along the way, we realized that we just don't have to buy hardware. We also have to buy their AMCs. And the basic things like wiring and maintenance has to be invested in. I think governments do look at hardware distribution as a popular move, right? You can distribute devices, you can put logos, you can put pictures, it looks fancy. There are active conversations on that hardware is just step 0. The device is only as good as the learning solutions which is loaded onto it. We've done some incredible work with IIT Bombay and IIT Delhi on coming up with an index called Tulna, which actually allows government to assess, review and evaluate products and solutions which should be loaded onto the devices. So I do see the needle shifting, where governments are looking no longer just at hardware, but are asking the right questions on engagement, on the pedagogical solutions, on learning gains when they are buying solutions. Of course, the still tougher journey will be to ensure we are building the capacities of our teachers to not think of ICT period in the timetable as it's my break. It's actually helping me do my teaching learning better.
On language, math, science.
On language, math, science,
yeah.
Exactly, right? I mean, if my in-class instruction is only helping me get a certain proportion of students to a certain learning level, how can that be complemented with these solutions which exist, either in the ICT lab in school, or if older children have been distributed devices by the government, or a shared device that, older children or young children have access from their parents' device. But Pranav, it has to come together as an integrated solution. It has to be one core instruction design. I mean, even as an educated parent, if it was left to me to figure out what my child is learning in school, what's available on, paid or unpaid resources and apps online, and I have to string that instruction design, I think that's beyond my capability. And the legitimacy of how it's anchored to the curriculum, to what the teacher instruction is, where it can be used either to, go back and revise or practice a subskill, or even for continuous practice. I think that's the power of EdTech that needs to be unlocked in an integrated solution. Also, EdTech in India, people tend to think of it as two extremes of the pendulum, right? I mean, when COVID happened, EdTech was the manna from heaven and, EdTech would save us. Post-COVID, when schools opened, it became, but EdTech's led to the whole digital divide, which, by the way, is real, right? Kids in a mid-income or high-income school probably have a dedicated device with uninterrupted internet and a more capable school education system or a learning management software which anchors it for them, which is not true for the children, who are having to rely on a shared device, where the parents are also worried whether, the time that they're spending on the device is safe or not, right? Yes. So the solution, I mean, the answer is neither, right? It's not what will know. I firmly believe that EdTech is not a replacement for a teacher, a classroom, and a school. But it is a great augmentation strategy, and it's not all, it's not that's the haves and the have-nots between tech availability will lead to a widening of the learning divide. Increasingly, I think, Pranav, and I'm sure EI is already working on this, is as states are setting up these model integrated schools, there is more OPEX funding available. There is the infrastructure available of ICT labs and digital classrooms, which can then be shared not just for high school and middle school, but also the early grade children. And I think states do realize they will have to take a phase-wise approach. There cannot be a general brush stroke where infrastructure and software and teacher capacity building will be made available for every child in every classroom. But I think increasingly, as these solutions are emerging, and also interesting insights and evidence is emerging, I think also, do we have strong enough evidence where this has worked in partnership with the government system will be a great, I think we'll be able to leverage that more effectively for these discussions. I think, again, a shared experience of EI and CSF has been the PAL procurement that Andhra Pradesh as a state started with. Went into suspension for a long time between political and bureaucratic changes, but that is, again, an active thread. Yes. So I think, again, we need to continue to be optimistic and patient for the opportunities when they present themselves.
When we have this conversation 10 years from now, my dream is that, the access to one period of personalized adaptive learning in schools is the same as what midday meal has achieved. Where every day, every child gets a hot meal at lunchtime. And my wish is that 10 years from now, every day, every child gets access to one period of a high-quality adaptive learning software that is guaranteeing improvement in literacy and numeracy if the child chooses to use it. So that's my hope and wish for the future.
Fingers crossed.
Do you have one?
So I have three actually. So we didn't get to touch upon that, but my deep wish over the next 10 years is that every 5-year-old in India goes to a Bal Vatika class. I genuinely believe early childhood education is step zero for Nipun Bharat. NEP has been very, very ambitious in calling out 3 years of pre-primary. I do believe a 3 and 4-year-old deserves and needs to be in an Anganwadi because of, safety, security, social emotional learning, health, vaccination. But for early learning, my first deep wish is every 5-year-old in what we call a kindergarten class within the education system, helping them start their early learning journey in the right manner, focusing on those pre-literacy and pre-numeracy skills. I think that's one. My second wish is to say that every state in India is running a well-designed Nipun program, whatever, whether Telangana calls it Holi Metu, Assam calls it Nipun Ahom, UP and Haryana call it Nipun Uttar Pradesh and Nipun Haryana, where we are confident that the design of the program, when implemented well by teachers, by the system functionaries, will lead to learning impact. And teachers and the system are equipped to figure out that learning trajectory. So I know that if some child is not learning a particular skill, a particular subcompetency, there is mechanism to correct for that within. So my second deep wish is a well-designed program in the hands of every teacher, where parents are aware, community knows how to hold the system accountable for delivering that, where education in India is not run on remediation. Yes. The daily timetable is ensuring learning, where we don't need a zero period or we don't need an after school program. And third is to truly leverage the power of technology in India from a governance perspective, monitoring perspective, as well as learning perspective.
Well, those are very ambitious and very inspiring, and provides me my refuel and energy to continue working in this sector. Shaveta, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation on systemic reform. I got to learn about how to work at scale. One has to partner with the government. There's both the bureaucrats and the political ministers that one has to take along in the journey. I resonate with your emphasis on forming partnerships where every organization can choose to do what they really are good at, but rely on the other partners to be able to execute on what's not their core competence. I know that this has a lot of meetings, emotions, vulnerable conversations that need to be facilitated. And I agree that, for anything to achieve scale, more role clarity, as well as, involving the government through field visits and making them the true heroes is going to be an important one. I share your enthusiasm for EdTech. Occasionally, I feel defeated when I sort of see the lack of government procurement at scale, even though we have managed to scale through philanthropic money. But I hope that as India is, crossing over the basics of providing access to school education and then providing computers and then providing AMCs, that they actually procure learning software just like how they procure textbooks. And internet, computers, and electricity is as basic to school as water, buildings and toilets. So that was great. And I hope that we meet again in 10 years where all your 3 dreams are realized. But this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaveta.